Hi, everybody. I'm sure you all are looking at my face and going, Sam Gianfala must not be joining her because she's watching the clock, clearly. Yes, Sam is not here again today. We miss him, but we send him all the wonderful wishes as he is working. And I just realized I've hidden my announcements. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to post our announcements as soon as we're done, but we've got a few things I wanted to share with you all real quick. We have the Torrance Theater's Play at Home series, which you know is on Sundays. And on the 13th of December, Catherine Rahm, who we love and adore, will be playing Miss Daisy in Driving Miss Daisy. So you don't want to miss out on that. Go to torrancetheatercompany.com and their Play at Home series, and you can reserve your ticket through there. Also, Katniss would like for me to share with you all that Alice Lunsford has written a new book. So please check out her book. She announced that at our last member meeting. So please make sure and check that out. And our new play series, Sam Gianfala is directing Recipe. I almost forgot the name of that. Recipe. And that is on Wednesday, November 18th. So coming up. And you do not want to miss this. We're going to be going live. And then that will be released right after KPLive on Sunday, the 22nd, for the rest of the public. If you want to see it live, come join our member meeting and see what we're all about. And you can email marketing@KPLive.org, and I will get you all hooked up. And that is a lot of fun. And then we are still taking submissions. So if you have written a play for Zoom that is under 30 minutes and you would like to see it up and performed, email plays@KPLive.org, and they will take a look-see. Also, if you're interested in directing one of those, go ahead and email plays@KPLive.org. Also, Infinite Jest Theater Company has a telethon coming up, and that is Clowning Around with Shakespeare, where you control the hijinks. Tonight, the whole ham. And yes, the only comedic theater company in Los Angeles is doing a production of Hamlet, because that's a hooch. But this one's different, and you get to choose how it's done by making the actors do silly, ridiculous things. And we will have more about that as we get closer to the date, which is December 12th. So stay tuned for that. And then with a wonderful announcement of the show Deadlift, which is going to be one night only this Tuesday. And our amazing guest who is on our show today is going to tell us all about it later in the program. So without further ado, I would like to bring on my dear friend, Miss Aviva Pressman.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you? And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I had to mute myself during that intro because I was trying not to laugh at the continued cat coming down up and then you pushing the tail down and the tail coming back up.
Yeah.
It was good comedy.
She's pretty good. She's got the best timing of all. She never misses a cue.
Yeah, she nailed it.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, you hear that? You're a star. And she's like, I know. You're welcome. I'm pretty sure now that the viewers only come for her. Let's be real.
That's fair.
That's fair.
Whatever.
Yeah. I don't care. I'm shameless. So that's fine.
Yeah, whatever. Do what you got to do.
I love it. Aviva, I have to say, I know I tell you this a lot, but I'm a huge fan of yours. I have told our viewers that I'm a huge fan of yours. You are ridiculously talented. It's rude. That's how talented you are.
I do it because I like being rude to people, and it's just like a really direct way to do that.
That's right.
I paid for it. So.
I love it. That's the best. That's the best. So I'm excited today to learn a little bit more about you, though I feel like after watching your show, I kind of already know a lot about you.
It's true. I mean, that's some very specific parts of my life, but it does give you like a very good overview of like some of the big ones.
Yes.
I'd say. Yeah.
I love it.
For sure.
So if you could, for our viewers, give us just the Reader's Digest version of your life quickly, like where you're from, how you got into theater.
Sure. I'm from Los Angeles originally, and then I moved around and I came back, and I got into theater my parents met in a Broadway show. They were
Ooh.
in the Broadway cast of Gigi, which is not a good show, but they were in it. And my mom was a dancer and my dad was a singer. So growing up, I did both. I hated ballet, but I loved singing. And so I started doing musical theater. And then I was like, oh shit, I like acting a lot. And which is interesting when your parents are like a singer and a dancer, because they're like, we know all about acting. And you're like, you don't get it. But like,
Right.
really, there's more in common than not. But so I got it in. I was in it my whole life. You know, I grew up after school going and sitting in tech at my mom's ballet studio, or sitting on my dad's shoulders while he conducted a choir. So it really would have been, how did I get out of it?
Right.
would have been more of a story in terms of childhood, I think.
That makes sense. You were groomed for the theater, and now it all makes sense. All makes sense. I love that. So, was there always just this, I mean, obviously you would enjoy it, you're around it, you're exposed. Was there always this drive that you knew you were going to continue this on as a career?
Yeah, kind of. It was, there's been kind of ups and downs in like, in what way am I going to pursue? Like, is it going to be more theater? Am I going to go more towards voiceover? Am I going to, like I said, I took ballet as a kid, but I didn't like it. So I wasn't going to go towards dance. And then I thought, like, I'm going to be a singer. And a lot of my career has gone back and forth between, like, I'm an actor who sings and I'm a singer who acts. And then at a certain point I was like, that's stupid. I do both.
Right.
So, but I generally, even as a kid, even the careers I said I was going to have that weren't that were still artistic. It was like, I'm gonna draw, or I told my dad that I wanted to be like a professional, funny face maker in the Olympics. And my dad was like, that's not in the Olympics. And also, the people who win funny faces competitions, it's usually because they have a natural, like, very funny face. Like, you'd have to not have any teeth and then make a funny face on top of that. So he was very blunt with me for the fact that I was at an age where I thought that was a job. And he wasn't just like, great. He was like, here's why you'll never make it. So even my dreams as a little kid, I was always like in the performance mindset, in the artistic mindset. I was never like, I'm going to be a scientist.
I love that. I also, though, love how sensible your father is, to be like, I hear your idea, but here's why it's not going to happen. That is great. I want to give a shout out really quickly to Stephen Dottie, who's saying hi, and Lois Fargo Bondrick. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for watching. And now, of course, my next question came. Oh, yes, I remember now. So you knew you were headed on this path. And what did you do for training? You have all these options in front of you. What do you do?
So I went to Syracuse University for 2 years, but that was not for me. I learned a lot there, but the environment was really not for me. And then I transferred to Oklahoma City University, and I went there. And then I've always really enjoyed training. So I continued after that pretty regularly. So I took classes for a couple of years when I was in DC at Studio Theater Acting Conservatory, and then came to LA, and I did one show that it went very badly for a number of reasons. But I felt like when things were going wrong, I didn't necessarily deal with them as well as I should have. Oh. So then I took a whole lot of improv at UCB. Great. So I've trained a lot of places, but the main things were getting a BFA in college.
I love that. And OCU is an exceptional school.
Yeah, I really loved it there. It was what I thought when I visited the school and I walked into what they call, unironically, the Hall of Queens, because it's got all the beauty queens from the school, like just hundreds of pictures up there. I was like, oh, okay, well, they have good training, but I'm going to have no friends. I will not fit in here. And then it ended up being the most popular I've ever been in my life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, people were like, you're a Jewish. I've never met one of those. Like, everyone was very excited to like learn about me.
Oh my gosh.
yeah, and people would always call me with their like sex questions because I wasn't afraid to talk about things. Like I became this like liberal bastion in
Yes.
red state. So I had a great time there. I've never been so cool.
It's so funny to hear you speak about it in that way, because that would not have occurred to me. I grew up there. So
Yeah,
I didn't think like that would, yeah. But as you're saying it, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually.
yeah. They were like, oh, you're so different and unique. I was like, I'm not. I'm just
Right.
not from here. Like,
Oh, I love that. Well, I have to say, every person I have ever met that has come out of OCU is brilliant, hands down. And I know a handful, and I've worked with a handful all over the country. Fantastic training. That's great. One of the things I love that you talked about is that you love training, and that as soon as you left, you've continued. And we have had, the past two shows, we've had a couple of our students that were from the Kentwood Kids on and talking about what they do in life. And I often say, you'll never stop learning. Please don't ever stop learning and never think you know it all. So I'm really thankful. I want to just be like, I hope you all are listening. I'm not the only one that says that. So,
and like the more other things you learn about, the more well-rounded you're going to be. Most plays are not about being in plays. So you need other life experiences. You need to learn other stuff.
right, exactly.
You're not going to be able to relate to anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. And bring that authenticity to it. I think that's great. I think also sometimes we forget that we need to stay in shape. And that helps us to stay in shape. Our body is our only tool.
Yeah.
It encompasses all the tools rather. So I think that's great. So exercising that and training, I love that.
Yeah.
Do you, and if you have any recommendations of people when we get out of the apocalypse studying in Los Angeles, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got lots of, I know a lot of voice people. I know because I didn't do my main training in LA, I know fewer like acting coaches and stuff, but I know a few, and I know some good dance people. So
that's so great. I love it. So let's go a little bit into this show, because it's a lot about who you are, what makes up you. What inspired you to write this all down and to do this, and why now?
So it was an interesting journey. Last year, I was doing a show with San Diego Rep, and the guy they do a Jewish festival there, and the guy who runs that sat down with me and wanted to talk to me about being part of that Jewish festival. And then we started talking about the idea of me doing like a one-person show for them. And my first thing that I pitched was like, oh, I could do an evening of like all different kinds of Jewish music. And he was like, that's not going to sell. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was kind of thinking of like ways that I connect to Judaism, and so much of it is about my family. And when I think of stories of my family and my life, a really big part of that is wrapped up in my father's death and caretaking for him and all of that. And then also just like the identity of being somebody whose family is very public, you know, that my grandpa was this famous rabbi, and that my dad was a teacher for 40 years at the high school I went to. And they weren't celebrities, but they were celebrities within my world. So I rarely went somewhere where I was Aviva Pressman. I was usually Aviva, granddaughter of, or child of, right? So that was kind of part of it. So I was going to start writing that for them and possibly do it in their Jewish festival this year. Then the world ended.
Right.
And I was booking a lot of other work. So I was like, well, I'm going to be busy over the summer. I don't know if I'll even be able to do that festival. And then when the world ended, my friend Emily reached out to me. And she was starting the theater company, Local Classic Repertory, that was going to be all online.
Oh, wow.
All virtual theater. And she said, would you want to direct something in my season? And I was like, oh, hell yes. So I'm looking for things to direct, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't want it to feel like it should have been on stage and now it's on Zoom and it's not as good because it's on Zoom.
Right.
What are some things that I could do that would make it captivating on screen. So I'm looking for shows, and I was thinking about the idea of doing some live drawing, some live art creation, because it's such a different thing than what you usually see, and it gives you some of the spectacle that right now I think we're missing with online theater, because we're like, well, it's like we're not quite doing what you need to do for filmmaking, and we don't have the spectacle and the live presence for theater. So I thought, well, maybe this is something I could use. And I had done it before with Astro Boy at Sacred Fools. I had done some live drawing direction. I'm in the perfect spot for this.
I'm excited.
For which I won this award.
Yes.
Yes. For specialty live art direction.
I love it.
As I now just like throw that award.
I won this award.
I just have so many. So then as I was doing that, I like just didn't find the right show for that. And so I'm like pitching her things, and I'm like, I was thinking of writing this show about my family or death or Jews and with art. And she was like, yeah, okay, let's do that then. And I was like, are you sure? And I'm like, I wouldn't be directing it, which was your offer. And she was like, I trust you. And she just let me go with what I wanted to go with.
I love it.
So yeah. So I invited my friend Zandy to direct it, and she was immediately like, yeah, let's do this. And we went off on our way.
I love it. It's perfect. And I really think exactly what you describe about using I'm carefully choosing my words, because I really don't want any of the experience to be affected for anyone who will see it. And I hope you will all see it, even if you've already seen it, see it again. But I love the way that you incorporate the visual arts. It does become a spectacle in a way I could never have imagined. And one of the things I said to you, and I feel, and to everyone, because I, again, cannot stop talking about this, is that we're having a struggle right now in the theater world of trying exactly what you said, of trying to take the essence of live theater and put it on screen, because we cannot be together. And it doesn't work, because as soon as we start to do that and we start to go, I know we can do these different camera angles, and we can, and I'm like, yeah, that's called a movie. So, you know, so we're finding it's really hard to find this balance. And Miss Pressman, you found it. Because I sat there and I watched it, and I was like, this is entertaining. This is beautiful. It is shot really well. So let's give a little shout out to your camera guy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it does have an element of film. He's got the experience, we know, but it has this feeling of if I'm watching a live onstage performance, so much that at the end I went, I have to see this live. I want to be in the second row watching this happen for real. And that's a great feeling when you're watching a Zoom thing, you know? So.
Yeah, I'm so glad it brought that feeling. And it was shot on my iPhone.
The whole thing is shot on your iPhone?
The whole thing's shot on my iPhone, no microphone, just my iPhone, and like a ring light, basically. And we had a couple scenes where we did them from two angles so that we could really make sure to see the art and everything. But mostly it was just done from one angle. And the idea behind it is that we could do it on stage. So not a lot of like tricks, or it's mostly just shot through. Yeah. And there's something where we really wanted to make sure you could see a certain angle.
Yeah. Any of the tricks that are in the show, and there are tricks in this show, can be done on stage and live. And that is going to make it so cool. And I cannot wait to see this when we are in the new world. In the new world. Yeah. How was the process preparing for doing this show? I mean, it's essentially you. So how is that different or similar when you're preparing for other roles?
Well, it's different because we were writing it. and rehearsing at the same time, because it was like we had 2 months to like make the whole thing happen.
Oh my word.
And yeah. So, but it's storytelling. So it's not like I had to do a lot of memorizing as much as I would put on my mask, I would go outside, I would take a walk where I talked to myself and told the story. And then when I would go, okay, that part doesn't quite work, then I would just start over and start talking again. And what I would do, basically the way we rehearsed it, was I would make a video of myself telling the story from a scene. I would send it to the director. She would give me some notes on it. I would, while I was at home, figure out what the visual art elements were going to be and practice those. Then we would do one rehearsal where we did the storytelling and the art at the same time. And then we would shoot it. And we did that for each scene. So it was rehearsed very little.
Wow.
But because it's one person, we didn't have to have because it's me, she's not going to be like, I think this character is more like this. More like defining, like, hey, this part's boring, don't talk about that. Or I want to hear more about this. Or, hey, you forgot to tell us your grandma's name.
Right.
Or whatever. She's looking at different things for it. And I was able to do a lot of it alone. And then just have another set of eyes to give me the coaching and the feedback. So it definitely was less rehearsal than it would be for a real play. But also because there could also be less rehearsal because it was filmed. So like on stage, like you have to rehearse until you can't get it wrong.
Right.
Whereas with this, I had to rehearse until I could get it right. But if I didn't get it right the first time, it was okay, unless I had already started a charcoal drawing and then I'm like, fuck, I gotta take that down and reset it up.
Right.
That was the annoying part. So yeah, those were the biggest differences. Otherwise, it's a lot like rehearsing a play.
Yeah. I think that's great. And you touch on something that I think is is thematic through all of our genres, and that is it's storytelling. Yeah. That's what we do. That's our job. And whatever way we're doing it, via film, live theater, musical theater, whatever, we're telling stories.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that is wonderful. Lois Vargo Bondrick says this was such an awesome show, a must see. I'm not the only one that's raving about it. See, I'm sure everyone is. Actually, I know everyone is because that's how I kept seeing it on Facebook, and I was like, I gotta see this show.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So it's really great. One of the things too. So okay. We've talked about it technically. We've talked about this stunt because you are incorporating art, you are incorporating your musical, beautiful singing voice. But the subject matter is also very moving. It is very well written. And I think anybody can identify with this, regardless of how close their story matches yours. It doesn't have to, because it's really about family and relationships.
Yeah.
And it really spoke to me right in the heart, in the feels. And it inspired me. It was really inspiring. I came off of it very motivated and connected. I am curious, what is your end game doing this project, and how do you feel theater is a tool, and what is the power of theater? Like, what is its purpose?
Yeah. It's hard to know what my end game is exactly. Because I don't always work like that in life. I tend to go into things with more of a like, I want to do it and I want to do my best and then see what you get out of it. I think like I function better like that. But also that's really how I naturally function, because when you're like, what did you want to get out of this? I'm like, I actually hadn't thought of it other than, I thought about it career-wise, like, I would love it if some theaters picked this up and it could go places. But in terms of the impact I want it to have on people, I'm like, I'm really glad it had an impact on people. I wanted it to have an impact.
Right.
Whether it is that they laughed or they cried or that it made them call their family or made them stop calling their family. To me, that's not the important thing, because the important thing is that it had an impact. But I didn't have a goal in terms of what that was. I just didn't want people to be bored.
That's always a really good, focus when doing a show, is to prevent boredom.
Yeah. I was like, I want to have a good beginning, middle, end. I want it to be interesting. I want people to go like, oh, I didn't expect that, Art. So I thought about all these technical things, and I thought about okay, well, like I get really serious here, so I better say something funny here, because otherwise it's just going to be too much of a downer or whatever. But I don't usually think about what I want people to come away with from art that I make, I guess.
Right. I think that's beautiful. Well, I mean, it kind of, maybe the point is that, like you said, people are coming away with something, so they're going to talk about it or think about it, or even just in the moment have an in the moment experience of relief, of laughter or tears. Well,
like one thing I hadn't thought about in the responses, one response I got was from Madhuri Shaker, actually, who's like this amazing prolific writer, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm glad you liked it. But one of the things she said was that she and her husband Seamus talked about what kind of parents they want to be after they watched it. And that hadn't occurred to me at all, because I'm not looking to become a parent. I was looking at it from the perspective of being the child of these people.
Right.
And so to me, that's so cool that people got something out of it that I never would have, that I didn't think of at all.
Right. Oh, I think that's amazing, Aviva, because as artists, our job is to not force another person's experience, but provide a path for them to have an experience. And I think that's great that you're telling this story that, I mean, in my opinion, it has so much for people to learn. I'm not surprised that somebody went, oh, what kind of parent do we want to be? Like, I think that's great, because you're sharing that. And also, what kind of child do I want to be? How am I going to be if I'm put in this situation where I have to take care of a parent? Working with siblings, that's another thing that comes up in this story. But I love that you are approaching it without any kind of expectation, that it's just, here's my story.
Yeah, I mean, of course there's the expectation of like, I want people to like it.
Right.
I want people to be like, you're great.
Right.
I mean, if I didn't need any validation, I could just do it alone in my room. But, well, I did do it alone in my room, but I wouldn't have put it online. So obviously, I guess I wanted validation, but in terms of what kind of validation, I'm open.
Right. I love that. That's great. That's brilliant. And I love that quote. Just what kind of validation? I'm open. That's great. I'm going to take that. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. You've been storytelling for a really long time, compared to your entire life. Most of it. What keeps you going? Is there a purpose for doing this? Especially now we're in this pandemic, we can't really create art. And then you said, yes, I can. And what keeps you going?
It's such a big part of my identity and the way I express myself. Some of it is the validation thing. My mental health I'm lucky in that I'm not somebody who like was born with this total serotonin deficit and cannot get it up no matter what. But at least since the death of my father, it is harder for me to be in a good emotional place if I don't have something that I'm creating, or some of that feedback, or some like just some creative outlet for me. And so I will, if I'm not booking, then I do get very depressed. And some of that is the validation aspect of it, and the rejection, and all the stuff you're not supposed to care about, but it's hard not to. Right. And then some of it is just the creative energy of making something together and channeling your emotions and getting and improving and having these breakthroughs and all of the exciting stuff that you are supposed to care about as an artist. but without it, I honestly just don't do very well. And I don't really know, I have not convinced myself yet that I am enough without it.
Yeah.
And I know that that's a struggle for a lot of people, and it's certainly a struggle for me. So that's a big part of it. I started to feel so much better in the pandemic once I had this to work on.
Right.
So thank you to Emily for calling me and asking me to do it, and to my director Zandy for jumping into it with me, because it has made a really big difference in my emotional health.
Yeah. You know, a few times on the show and also in just life, we've talked a lot about artists, and that it is at our core. It's who we are. And it's interesting when you said you haven't convinced yourself you could be without it. I kind of feel, I don't know, personally speaking, that I am something without it. Like it is who I am. And I think exactly what you said in this pandemic, you know, at first I was like, yay, no responsibilities. This is great. Nobody else get sick. This is awesome. And then the third day into the pandemic, I was like, oh, this is hard. You know, and then here we are, 7,000 years later. But I agree with you. The second I started to actually start creating again, even in a weird way, that part of me started to come alive. And I found that happy place of not having to be anywhere, which I love, but also being able to be, you know, who we are, which is artists and creators.
Right.
It's just who we are. That's just it.
It is. And it's not to say that you can't get it from other things, because, well, I've gotten it from other things during the pandemic, like voiceover jobs or cabarets or readings or whatever. But also, like, I'm really lucky that my day job came back, and that I get to be really creative in my day job, and I get to teach and connect with people and act and all of these different things where I can feel like I have a purpose.
Right.
But so I think it doesn't just have to come from theater necessarily, but having an outlet, I think, is important.
I agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. I mean, this is a little theater interview show. I think that's something that it's important to understand about artists. Look, we're all struggling in this pandemic, but I think artists, musicians, dancers, visual artists, everybody, we struggle because exactly like what you said, it's our purpose. Mm-hmm. Whether we are teaching it, whether we are storytelling, whether we are writing music, whatever it is, it's who we are. And when we don't get to do that, it's really challenging.
Yeah.
For anybody to not be able to do what they do, it's challenging.
Yeah, I mean, people who lose their jobs who aren't artists, also go through depression. It's not unique to us. It's just that we also get a certain high from, like, the adrenaline rush. Like, there's other chemical things that happen with us.
That's true.
There are certain things with memory of how you use your voice and the pleasure sensations of that, or like the endorphins of dancing, or all of those things, in addition to having a purpose and a job. Right. That when they go away, it's just like, my brain and my body and nothing knows what's going on anymore.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. That is the perfect description. I want to switch gears really quickly. You mentioned 2 women leaders in getting this production up, your producer and your director. Sorry, Katniss is also getting my attention. Katniss is like, yes, women. I want to talk a little bit about women in leadership and women in leadership in theater. Mm-hmm. And you recently finished your term as one of the artistic directors of Sacred Fools. Mm-hmm. That's a big job. Yes, it was. How has your experience been in these different leadership roles? And I guess where I'm going with this, what's your experience and how do you feel it's influencing how theater's changing and where we're going? It's
hard. I mean, I think theater leadership is always hard because you deal with so many different personalities and people are so passionate about their art, and every piece is somebody's baby. And for every piece you get to say yes to, you have to say no to 50 others or whatever.
Right.
But I think men in leadership don't realize the additional challenges that women in leadership have. I think even the ones who want to, it's not something they can fully understand. And then there are others who don't want to. And so there's a lot of emotional labor on top of the other work. So if men are doing this much work, they think women are doing this much work as well, but they're actually doing all this other stuff that the men didn't have to do to convince people that they are doing the work at all.
Right.
To convince somebody that what they just said to you is actually really sexist. I had somebody in leadership say to me, you shouldn't say to anyone that there's sexism in the company because it could hurt the feelings of the men in leadership. And they were trying to say that it's a PR issue, right? Okay. Like that I shouldn't say anything like that publicly because it makes the theater look bad. But what they totally did not seem to understand was that for women, if you see a woman in leadership saying there are problems with sexism in the company, but we're working on it and we're working towards getting better, that is so much less of a red flag than seeing a man in leadership saying, we don't have a sexism problem. Sometimes people say we do, but we don't. And those were the two statements that were being compared. And to the man telling me, they were like, well, you said that there was sexism in public. That makes us look bad. And so the amount of emotional labor I had to do to explain that it looks bad to him as a cis, white, straight man, and to everyone else, what I said looks better.
Right.
Like, so there's just a certain amount of extra work that has to be done all the time because those things become your job.
Right. And do you feel that, are you seeing in your own world, I mean, you work all over. So are you seeing a growth and a change and more acceptance of women in leadership positions?
Yeah, I am. I have seen that. Yes, which is really lovely. It's really, really nice to see. I've worked with some amazing women directors. I think there's still a long way to go. But I do see people working on it. And the number of times that a man has interrupted me and then said, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh.
Like, so even people who are still working on it are realizing, oh, this is something that I'm working on, is knowing how to be in the room with women in a more productive way. And so I think things are changing, but of course, I think that there's like a push and pull, as there always is with progress. And I think there's also this kind of weird thing with, we don't want to be racist. And so, but we think we can probably get away with sexism as long as we're not racist.
Oh, interesting. Like
there's this push and pull for certain men where they think it's okay to be one or the other.
I see.
In a sense. It's kind of hard to describe, but I see it sometimes with like we need to be diverse, so we better find a woman who is Black and disabled and gay to put in the room, because otherwise we might have to find a Black person, a disabled person, and a gay person, and that's a lot less space for the white men.
Right.
So we better get it all in one person, rather than like actually caring about the points of view of all different kinds of people. Right. And then like getting people in that room like that, because you're reaching out and you're meeting more people and you're seeing who's good for the job and like open to the fact that someone like that might actually be the best person for the job. It's just like filling slots.
Interesting.
So I still see a lot of like slot filling rather than actual caring about the points of view. It's like it's kind of like how Republicans will be like, oh, look, we got a Black person to do our thing. Or like, we got a woman to say that they hate abortion, and it's like, are you actually trying to understand the point of view of all the women who say that they believe in freedom of choice or whatever? Or are you just looking for somebody who fits a slot of diverse but agrees with your male point of view?
Right, right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That is so interesting. Absolutely, it does. And real quickly, I want to say, Adam Phelan watching says, thank you for the insight. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you. Thank you, Adam, for sharing that with us. It does make sense.
I kind of just rambled and didn't know if I even said anything.
You did. And I think it does make sense to me, because I think the importance with diversity of whatever it is we're talking about, whether it is sexual orientation or race or whatever, gender, non-binary gender, whatever, I think it is, you hit the nail on the head, and that is wanting the diverse experience, thought, and knowledge, and not just having that person there because we need to, it's the right thing to do, or we have to show, like the actual right thing to do. She agrees. She feels very passionate about this.
Cat representation.
The actual right thing to do is to hear and want to learn about somebody else's experience and what it is that what they're having to do. And the other thing, so it's interesting because as a director myself, I have had a lot of interesting experiences where when I share them, I don't want it to sound like somebody did something wrong, but it's like, take a moment and just think about what it is, what that must have been like for me as a director when, in order to be listened to, instead of being fun, cute, bubbly Samantha, I had to be like, listen, and it took so much time to get there, and the stress that brought into me day after day after day until I got to that point.
Right.
That's just one example, but I think
I went through that and I understand what you're saying.
Okay. Yeah. But I think, it's interesting in the VP debate where Kamala said, I'm talking, excuse me, I'm speaking. And all over my feed was women going, I've had to say that. But it's one of the things that I don't think people realize how often we're like, excuse me, I'm speaking. Right. I was saying something, and that's just something little. I mean, that's just one example. But what's interesting is that so many of us have some of these same examples. Yeah. And you're speaking about the emotional portion of that, of the work, I think is something that maybe people haven't always considered and thought about.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. I had somebody say to me, I don't think that, they said, I don't think that there's really a boys club. I think it's just that the men are doing the majority of the work.
Oh.
And I was like,
okay,
bring it in. But one of the things that I realized he was saying was that the women keep quitting the jobs and the men stay in them longer.
Oh.
And what I was realizing is that is because of a way that women were being treated. It was not because women were not willing to do the work. It was that the work for the women was not tenable.
Yes, I see.
And so what he was seeing was, he was right, that is what he was seeing.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the whole story.
Yeah.
And like kind of recognizing that, like, it's not that you keep inviting people of color into your company and they keep quitting because they're quitters.
Right.
You need to ask yourself, why don't they want to stay here?
Right. That is an excellent point. And I think that is where we are as, personally speaking for Kellen, where we are as a theater too, is looking at what is it we have not been doing, or what are the things we have been doing that maybe we could change, to try and get a more diverse grouping of people, of audience members. And I think it's real easy. I mean, we did this even, like, why aren't people coming to see this type of show? Rather than just saying, oh, people don't like Shakespeare, we go, maybe we're doing bad Shakespeare, or maybe we're only doing Shakespeare in a way that is, there's no like different way, and people are like, oh, we've seen this a bajillion times. Everybody's in tights and we don't care. But, and I think that's a loose way of talking about how we're doing this with women in leadership. Why aren't they volunteering directing? Why are we having a problem not getting people of color in to direct or lead? I think that's great. We have to ask those questions and not make an assumption.
Yeah. And we have to be open to the fact that like, we've all made mistakes.
Yeah.
In every side of life, we've all made mistakes. And if we're not allowed to grow, then what's the point? So rather than looking back and going like, and getting defensive and saying like, I wasn't racist, I was never racist. Like, look back and go like, oh, what I said was probably very hurtful. Yeah. And I'm going to do the work. I'm going to like figure out how to go forward. I have a friend who I was telling her about some struggles that I was having with some men. And I was just like, you know, and I feel like they're trying. And she was like, how are they trying? What are they reading? What podcasts are they listening to? And she was naming all these concrete things. And I was like, well, like they say they care. And I was like, you know what I mean? And it was just that realization. And it was something I had to look at in myself too, of like, well, what am I reading? Like, do I think I'm not racist because I have friends of all different colors and because I grew up in a diverse community? Or is there more actual research and reading that I should be doing and more like listening to experts that I should be doing? And it really changed. This was a number of years ago, but it really changed the way that I approached allyship. Because it's not just good intentions, it's also doing everything that you can to learn about different communities and like looking at things and going like, really messed that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I know I can think of times that I cringe now about like, I can't believe I even had that thought in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is kind of coming back full circle, talking about your training. This is something we need to do all the time. We never stop because people's experience in life never stops. We're always going to have stuff we have to share that we experience as are other people. And I do see, I see a lot of people becoming more aware, doing research, watching movies, like our friend Adam saying, thank you for this insight, like listening to other people's experiences. I know that we're doing that. I think that's really great. And I think it's really important that we use our tools and our skills as artists to share those experiences as well and to watch them. To watch experiences other than our own. Yeah.
I do actually hope, you know, you talked about what I hope people get from my show. And I do hope that people get some kind of insight into a little bit of a Jewish experience. Because I think a lot of people are sort of like, oh, yeah, Judaism is Christianity minus Jesus. Because we're in this very Christian society, and it's so vastly different in theory, in practice, in everything, that like, you know, when people hear that my grandpa was a famous rabbi, they're like, oh, so what do they feel about this? And I'm like, what? Like, they're so liberal, they're Jewish, and they're like, but they're religious. And like, it doesn't mean the same thing as you think it means. You know? So I do hope a little bit that people watch it and go like, oh, Jews are fun. Like, or they care about things, or you know what I mean? Like, there's so much anti-Semitism out there that I hope that I hope I can create connections with people through them seeing that show that would help with that.
You know, I think it does, to be honest. I have a lot of connections with Judaism, so that there was not necessarily a lot of new stuff for me personally. However, that being said, it was one of the first times hearing somebody talk about their experience in the way that you talk about it, which is not, let me impart this religious experience onto you, you know, as in like a proselyting or something like that, but rather, here's just my life experience in this. And obviously that played a large role in your life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that happens with most minorities, is this thing of like, you constantly feel like you have to be educating because it's like, oh, well, nobody knows what it's like to be from Venezuela. So if I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to tell you. all of these things about our culture, and it's like this serious thing. But like, really, your experience, I could probably learn just as much by you talking about your crazy Venezuelan grandmother.
Right. Exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so that's, and I think sometimes it's more relatable.
Yes.
When you can like just hear somebody's story of what it's like to interact with somebody of their culture.
Yes. I think that's a very important point, because it's showing people. We're all just people.
Yeah.
And we have our beliefs, we have our experiences, we have our wants, our desires, our fears, all of the things.
Mm-hmm.
We all do. And I think your show really does a lovely job of showing people.
Thanks.
So I definitely think, and there were a couple things that I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way.
Ooh, I wonder can you think of what any of them were? I'm so curious.
It's actually right from the very beginning. And I'm like, can I talk about the, yeah, when you're doing the first piece of art and talking about the setup of what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was, I mean, I know that's very common, but to me it's not, because I didn't go all the time. I only went to, with my friends.
So kind of just knowing what a synagogue looks like.
Yeah. I mean, like I've gone, but the importance of the pieces of that and that it's still there, and you know what I mean? Like, I don't think about it as an importance because I was just going with my friends.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. There's all these pieces that are there's like, there's the Aron HaKodesh where the Torahs are kept, and it's like such a holy thing. And then there's a light above it. It's called the Ner Tamid. I don't talk about this in the show, but it means like everlasting light. And it's always, and it's on above where the Torahs are. And, there's a light by my house that never turns green. It stays red forever. And we always called it the Ner Tamid. The Jewish joke.
I love that.
Because it's like a very big part of Jewish culture. But I think things like that like give such a better insight.
Yes.
Than just being like, don't drop the Torah, it is too holy. Like, I mean,
right.
Like, you're not supposed to drop the Torah, but it's not necessarily what it's about.
And you're talking about you're talking about it in the personal connection, made it personal for me.
That's great.
And I was like, that's really cool that it's still there, and like, anyway, it's just neat.
Yeah, it was there for a long time. They just remodeled, and I think they actually waited till my grandparents died to remodel. That's pretty special. I think they were ready for a remodel, but didn't want to disrespect the kind of like legacy.
That's pretty special.
Yeah, and it was a big deal. When they remodeled the synagogue, they actually called me and asked me to come in and give like the Pressman family perspective.
Wow.
On the whole thing, because it was, for so many people who had been members of that congregation for so long, it was such a huge, like, kind of sad thing to see this all change. And after losing the members of of my family who were like such leaders in the community, to then see this part of the synagogue lost, I think was really difficult for some people. And so they brought me in to be like, it's okay. It's all right. Because I was sad about it.